Hello, friends. Hello. Today I am trying to make a video, trying to get some things sorted out, and I'll show you how I make something like this, which I intend to be an ornament. I've done a lot of pendants and things that maybe could be ornaments. One wall hanging as well in this method. I'm using polymer clay, and I'm using clay for the basic sculpture and clay for the mold. Now, this method doesn't retain the same level of detail as you could get with some of the other mold media, but it's a lot less expensive, and generally speaking, it's good enough if you want to do a lot of reproductions and you can put back a little bit of the detail. So here I started with a sketch. I didn't fill it in or clean it up, but it was enough so that I could take some scrap tracing paper, trace my original design in slightly cleaner lines and add a little detail. And because I wanted the finished product to be looking in the same direction, I flipped the tracing paper over and traced it again, this time darkening the lines significantly. Make sure I got a lot of graphite on the tracing paper, because then I rolled out scrap clay like this. I rolled it out larger than this. Make sure that whatever you do for your original, you give yourself a little room to work. And then I laid this on top. Well, I would have laid it like this then. And I use this to roll and transfer all of those graphite lines onto there. So then I had a guide in my gray clay. Using my X-Acto knife, other brands are available, I cut away along the outlines that I had created and started pulling away the larger pieces. And then I used some of these other tools here to get some of the more delicate details, and then silicone tipped tools to smooth things out. And in this case, I did something a little special. I started trying to do some berries here, but it's hard to do circles, spheres that come out at you, and to get them nice and even and smooth. And so you can see that even though in my design I had a lot of berries, a lot of circles, I left a lot of these spaces blank and smooth, because then after I baked that, I used chalk pastels as a mold release, and then I came through and I used a tiny ball tool, and I just made the little lines, the little berries here, so that in the finished product they would stick out and they'd look much nicer. So you can see here, this is what I tried to do freehand, and that's what I did by just using this tool in the mold stage instead of in the initial sculpt. So what I'm planning on doing today is going ahead and making another one of these. This mold has gotten, each step of the way has gotten a little further away from my original sketch. So I'm going to use this mold and get the basic outline and then modify it a little bit. So you'll get to see some of that process. Now, when I'm doing this faux copper, as I do with a lot of my pendants, see if I can get this on camera. I don't know if it's focused. So this is the one that I'm currently wearing. That's another faux copper. What I tend to do is I start with something in the neighborhood of a copper patina color, something in that like dark muted bluish greenish color, depending on the project, I might push the color a little one way or another. In this case, I wanted to make sure that it was closer to sort of a forest green, or more importantly, a holly green. Now, when I load the mold, see that? I'm still getting used to the camera. When I load the mold with the chalk pastels, I want to be sure that I am laying down colors that are similar, you know, sort of in that same family. I use a nice stiff brush for it. Doesn't have to be a good stiff brush, it just has to be a nice stiff brush. Then, as you can see, this brown is one of my favorite colors. If you had a pot of powdered chalk pastel, that would probably do nicely. For these ornaments, I am adding a little pop of green. I do want it to be a little brighter, more festive. This is my idea of making things bright and festive. I know, I'm dark. And then I'm adding a little bit of this red. Now, these colors will be much more muted and diffuse by the time I'm done with the mica powders and everything. So don't worry about it being too harsh right now. Sometimes I like to put a little bit of red in there. So now comes the part for brute force. Now, I've rolled this out with this fairly close to the width of the mold, and it will spread a little bit. So if you don't want any mold lines at all around the edges, and you're not planning on trimming it later, make sure that your clay is smaller than the mold. And that's a good reason also to leave a little wiggle room in your mold, and maybe I could have left a little extra, especially around the chin. But I think it'll be all right, and I think it's also all right sometimes to just leave a little bit of that edge line. It's a handmade thing after all. Now, another important thing when you're deciding on placement for your mold or your stamp is that if you're going to be putting a hole through it, if you're putting a bail in it, behind it, it's less important. But if you're going to be putting a hole in it, you need to remember to leave about 3/4 of an inch across here or more, and to leave preferably about 1/4 of an inch above where you're going to place the hole. So the hole needs space on either side of it and above it, and you don't want to put it through a place that's already particularly thin. I'm not reinforcing the holes here like I do in the masks, so I want to make sure that there's plenty of polymer clay there. And by the way, I'm using Sculpey Primo for this. So definitely want to make sure I get the whole face in there. That's the most important thing for me in this particular version. So I'm just going to sort of choose that chin spot there. Oh. Here we go. All right. So here's where the brute force comes in. You almost can't press down too hard. And sometimes I worry I'm going to break a table. So far, so good. I have broken a tile before, but really, you got to get in there. And it depends on how firm your clay is and how deep your mold is, how much detail there is to get in there. But you, other than breaking your work surface, you pretty much can't push too hard. So please excuse my heavy breathing. gotta go in for maximum effort. And you can see what I was saying here about it being a little extra wide, and how in the process of pressing down, it does spread out to the sides and in all directions. But some of the pieces that people have liked the best out of my collection are ones where that line is there. And I think sometimes people just like that as a reminder that it is handmade. See, even with all of that, you can see that I didn't really get that much detail, and I'm going to have to go back in and work it, but that's all right, because I was going to try to alter this face this time. So let's see where we are. All right. So, looks like I also might have had a hair or something in here. That's all right, we'll work all that out. So, first thing is, you can see that the mold didn't quite get the nose shape right. See, this was the original, and somehow the mold squidged it out. So each time I come in, I know that I'm going to have to correct that right off the bat. And since I'm planning on changing it considerably, I'm going to be a little bit more aggressive with how I'm getting rid of that excess. If I can figure out how to do the speed change after the fact, I will probably speed this portion of it up. If not, I'm terribly sorry about how long this part is going to take, and feel free to fast forward or skip ahead a minute or two. Now I want to make everything a little daintier. I certainly like the nice strong faces I've been making, but I want a little variety in the face options that I'm offering. I hope I'm not wandering off camera here. Okay. I think I'm gonna go mostly just making all of it a little smaller and a little daintier. And I'm going to come up in here and accentuate the bone structure. Get that lower lip ending sooner. I feel like I'm getting shaky. I'm one of those people who gets nervous when they're being watched, so it's particularly masochistic of me to be trying to branch out into videos. I think it's easier when I can just do pictures. And then if I make a mistake, I don't have to show you the steps where I make a mistake. I can just show you the steps where I've fixed it. Except that originally I was thinking about doing a series of videos and tutorials where I screw things up, and then you can see how I address them and fix them and learn from my mistakes. I would very much like to do that, but I think I'm going to have to work up a little bit more courage before I can manage it. So it's interesting to me that I find it more difficult to sculpt in profile than I do in full relief. This sort of bas relief, half a face, is harder for me to get right. When I'm looking at a face, I can, like, here, I have, like this face here, you know, it's not perfect, but when I was doing this, you know, I can look at it and I can see, I can work on the slope of the nose in 3 dimensions. I can do all this here, and the lips are still a little pushed out rather than sort of spread out this way, but it gets the general idea. So, you know, when I'm looking at this, I'm thinking, okay, well, I can go a little bit more in here. In fact, I'm even going to go like that a little bit. There we go. See? And be a little bit more aggressive with the slope here as well. I think it'll be all right. And then I kind of never really know what to do over here. And I know I didn't put an ear here. Sort of covered that up a little bit with hair, but leaves a lot of just sort of empty cheek space. This was going to be an Athena. Actually, originally it was going to be my mother. I liked the face very much, but it didn't look at all like her. So I just sort of keep it by my workspace. And every now and then I can use it for a little bit of reference where it's applicable. But actually, when I was working on this face originally, this face, I took a picture of myself in profile. And I don't feel like I need to worry about either my botched attempts at self-portraits or using reference pictures I find online but don't necessarily have express permission for, because I'm not yet a good enough sculptor that people will know. So I can sort of use myself as a sculpting reference without everything looking like it's meant to be a self-portrait. Someday I will be good enough that I have to stop doing that, but that's not today. All right, so I want to give a little bit of depth and character. My son was suggesting that there are people out there who might really appreciate it if I started doing more like crone faces, and I definitely think that he's right. But I think that I need to get just a little bit better at this before I can do something that has lots of wrinkles or what people might think of as imperfections in a way that will look intentional. I worry that people will think that I just did a poor job, that it just looks lumpy like this, in fact. But it has character. So there are few little things that I want to smooth out here. But for the most part, I like this. It's similar to the others, but she has her own face now. I guess that's still pretty similar though, huh? Wow. Maybe a little bit more reshaping of the nose then. I'm just not getting delicate. That's all right. Faces, my friends, are hard. She's strong and she's beautiful. So I think I'm just going to leave her like that. Now, I'll go ahead and show you the rest of the process. Sometimes I will go ahead and put a gold tone under things that I want to be particularly bright. But because I'm taking a light hand on this one today, I think that I'll just go ahead and start with the darkest color. Sometimes I put the lightest color down to highlight things, and then I put the darkest color down in the recesses. And for that, I use a cotton swab. Usually, I just use the cap. You can see I am nearly out of my favorite color here. Figures my favorite chalk pastel is dirt brown, and my favorite mica powder is dark copper. What's it called? Antique copper. So I want to get this darkest color down into the recesses. And here, because it's a background, I also don't mind using a little pressure to make it mottled. I prefer the cotton swabs that have a paper stem to them. Partly, of course, because then they're more biodegradable, but also just because then as the cotton swab starts to break down, you're not going to, the paper is gentler, and you're not going to end up just poking little holes. You can use the cotton swab over and over again for the same colors. You get a lot of use out of it. Okay. So now I am going to go ahead. Please excuse me. I'm going to go ahead and use the super copper, which is extraordinarily bright. And I'm going to take a little bit of it on my finger. And I'm actually going to tap on my work surface to get a little bit more of it off. And then very lightly go along the berries. See, it doesn't take very much at all. And it's all right that I'm getting more than just the berries. I'm going to go back over all of these things in my main color. Ugh. Berries didn't come through at all there. Oh well. Each one's a little different and they're all handmade. Right? Oops. you know what? This reminds me, I forgot to show you the hole. So, want to make sure that for the hole, we have enough space that it's not going to break. Now I like this spot right here, but it's kind of close to the edge. So I think what I'll do is I'll sort of start there, but I'll pull it farther down. And slowly, gently, with a rotating motion, dig out a little spot. Where at all possible, I like to incorporate it in the flow of the organic lines. And then with this particular one, I flip it around and use the hard silicone tip at the other end to do this. When I pull it off of here and work on the back, I will take this same tool and reinforce that, because I don't know if you can see down in there right now, but it doesn't make an even hole all the way through. So you need to do it from both sides, sometimes more than once, to get it nice and smooth. So now that we have put down our super cuivre, I'm going to set that aside because I might touch some things up with that later. I'm now going to go to the super bronze. Again, I'm mostly using my fingers with this one because I want to get highlights and ridges. And you can see how as soon as you start applying this, all of your hard work starts coming out. And once you've put down a little bit of the mica powder, if you want to, you can use that to really smooth some things out. So you want that neck a little smoother, go ahead and you can apply a little pressure where before you put the mica powders on, it might have left more fingerprints or uneven dents. It's going to be nice and smooth now. So that's another reason I really enjoy using the mica powders. Just going in there and getting these ridges here. I'll go over some of the other colors as well. See how the work that I did on those leaves is coming out. But because I didn't do the mold very well over here, those leaves aren't coming out as well. That's what happens when I try to demonstrate. Oh well, say it with me, they're all handmade. Each one is unique. That's nice. Okay. Now, once I'm fairly happy with the front of it, I'm going to make sure that I get some mica powders along the sides here. And I will do more once I lift it up with a tissue blade. But for now, the mica powders are helping me to smooth and round out these edges. Nice.